Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the ECM podcast. I'm Caroline Fontagneux, and I'm very happy to host this series that will take you behind the scenes of new music on ECM Records. In this new episode, I'm meeting with Marilyn Crispell in her lovely home upstate New York to celebrate the release of the vinyl of her trio album from 2001, Amaryllis, as part of the Luminessence series. We talked about Marilyn's journey in music, her friendship and collaboration with Motian and Gary Peacock, the encounters that changed her life, and so much more. I want to start with asking you, why the piano?
When I was growing up, we had a piano in our house. And I had children's records, and I used to listen to them. And then I also had like a toy xylophone, and I would play songs from the records on the xylophone.
Do you remember the songs?
Not really. Maybe something about like an ugly duckling and stuff like that. Children's stories.
That sounds right, yeah.
Fairy tales. And so my parents said, she should have piano lessons.
Were your parents musicians?
No. My mother was taking piano lessons. That's why we had a piano in the house. And so I was 7 years old, and they hired a teacher to come to the house.
So it didn't feel like a chore? Because a lot of kids are just like,
No, I loved it.
You loved it,
yeah.
And you felt connected to the instrument right away. But jazz was not in your life at that time. I mean, it came around in your life a little bit later.
It came much later. Yeah, much later.
What happened? I think it's a John Coltrane record, right?
Yeah. I was 28 years old. I was living with a jazz musician, pianist, jazz and blues pianist, and he had a great record collection, mostly of contemporary jazz. And one night he was out playing a gig, and I just picked out a record to listen to, and it happened to be A Love Supreme. And my life changed that night. It was one of those experiences that is so strong, it just turns around your entire life.
Physically, emotionally, spiritually,
every way,
psychologically.
Yeah.
You still remember, I'm sure, this
Oh
moment
yeah, I
today.
remember it.
Yeah, but you
well.
were already improvising on piano. You were already spontaneously improvising, or were you just playing classical?
I used to play for dance classes, modern dance classes. I used to make a living doing that, and I would improvise for the classes. So that was most of my experience improvising. I hadn't improvised in the way that I do now before this whole Coltrane experience.
Yeah, but the partner that you were talking about, who was playing piano and jazz music, did you go see them play? And
yes, they were.
But the jazz didn't really talk to you until...
Oh, it did. It did. But I never imagined that it was something that I could do.
So improvising for those then classes, how different was it from jazz improvisation in a way? Like maybe it's a weird question, but what I mean is, improvising for those then classes, was it just you having fun with harmonies and notes? Was the difference something in terms of meaning or interpretation, or what was the difference?
Well, they would have exercises, and I would play things, repeating things a lot, and a lot of times I would have like a pedal tone. I didn't change harmonies a lot. And I remember I used a lot of fourth chords because I was into those also when I was playing classical music and Hindemith and all that.
That sounds pretty jazz to me, though.
Sometimes I would sing, I would play other little instruments, but there was a limitation that, you had to fit the music to what they were doing, and it wasn't just, it couldn't just be free.
Yeah.
In fact, I think a lot of musicians who played for dance classes didn't understand that, and they would just start playing stuff. But you had to leave a lot more space for the movement.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you had to be sensitive to what they were doing. It was really a collaboration. And I had never just done like open-ended improvising until I heard Coltrane, and then I moved back to. I was living on Cape Cod at the time, and I moved back to Boston to study with this teacher, Charlie Banakis, who was a famous jazz teacher.
Yeah.
And I studied with him for 2 years.
Why him?
Someone must have told me about him, just word of mouth. And I got on his waiting list. He had a 7-month waiting list at that time. And my boyfriend and I both moved back to Boston, and I started studying with Charlie.
And you stopped accompanying the dance classes?
No, I think I was still doing that.
And
I was still doing that.
So was the exercise different? Because in parallel you were learning jazz and learning how to play jazz. So
Very different.
yeah, was it
Very different?
I mean, did it influence your moment when you were playing for the dance classes?
I don't think they overlapped that much.
I see.
Actually.
Yeah.
So I would have to say no. But there was a musician in Boston while I was living there. His name was Baird Hersey, and he had a big band called the Year of the Ear. And he wrote the music for the band, and it was very contemporary, interesting stuff. And I used to go hear them all the time and became friends with them and with Baird. And one day he came over to our apartment and said, "Okay, we're gonna play." And I was like, "Well, no, no." And he said, "Just start playing and don't stop."
That's really hard.
So I did, and it was absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
It was like jumping off a cliff.
Yeah.
And not knowing where I was going to land. It was just that terrifying.
But there's something very exciting too.
Well, it broke the ice, and then I was never afraid to do it after that. But that was the first experience of that kind of improvising.
And then move forward to like a few years later, the creative music studio experience. Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah. When I was living in Boston, I became friends with Charlie Mariano, saxophone player who was teaching at Berkeley at that time. He had come back from Europe where he was living to teach at Berkeley. And I met him through a mutual friend. And he said, I know a place where they play the kind of music that you're interested in. And it was the Creative Music Studio.
Here in Woodstock.
Yeah. So he was the first one who told me about it. And then there was a saxophone player named Jim Hartog living in Boston who had come up here and was friends with Carl and Ingrid Berger, who ran the Creative Music Studio. And he said, let's go up there. I'll introduce you to Carl and Ingrid and all that. And so then I kind of became friends with Carl and Ingrid, and Carl invited me to come up for one of the summer sessions here. And basically, I never left. I went back to Boston, got my stuff, put it in a little trailer, and
Came back
drove
to
up
it.
here, and I've been here ever since.
That was that big of an experience and that big of a moment.
It just felt like the right thing.
Yeah.
You know, and in fact, it was the right thing, because I met almost everyone I've played with since, almost everyone.
I also want to discuss with you this Scandinavian experience and how it changed your approach to music and interpretation, because in the 90s, right, you met with Anders Jobin and everyone in Sweden, and there was something about space and silence and breathing that
Yes.
changed a lot in your way to play.
Yeah, it was like some other kind of version of the Coltrane experience, maybe not as intense, you know, but just because that was really the first.
Yeah.
But when I heard the Scandinavian musicians playing, it touched something inside me, and there was something about the lyricism and the tenderness that I knew was a part of me, but up to that point I had really focused on a lot on energy playing, which I love.
Yeah.
So I was very touched by the music I heard the Scandinavian musicians playing and the lyrical quality, and it kind of allowed me to somehow, or inspired me to open that door in my own music.
Yeah, you were saying that it was in you. That was not something that...
I mean, I had always played ballads and things like that, but it was a different kind of lyricism, you know, a different kind of feeling. And in a way, it also related somewhat to classical things I had played. So I feel like what I play is a synthesis of all the different things that I've done, you know, because they're all a part of me. And somehow that Scandinavian music helped to draw it together.
Would you say that it was more introspective?
That's an interesting question. In a certain way, although I think it's maybe all introspective in the sense that it's all exploring who you are. Maybe it was a different way of being introspective.
Yeah. And also, it's not always a good time in life to just leave space for lyricism or tenderness, to use your words. There is also moments in life where we're ready for that, and that were other when we were not really. And maybe that was a good timing for you.
Yeah, it was good timing. I always look back on things and think, oh, this was meant to be. You know, it couldn't have been any other way.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Is it hard to let go of the more performative approach of music? I want to ask this question through the lens of being a woman as well. Because I feel like as women, often we're expected to prove ourselves even more than, you know, our counterparts, male counterparts. So I was just wondering, is letting go of the more performative aspect of music difficult? Is it a way to let go of a form of proving ourselves with notes?
That's a really good question. When you say performative, you mean the more energy music
maybe
kind
that's
of
the
thing?
wrong word, and maybe that's a language thing, but I meant, more notes, more energy, more...
I mean, I still do that kind of thing, but it feels like it's coming from a more organic place in me, that I'm, you know, I have always felt that kind of energy also, you know. I think maybe at the beginning I really wanted to be heard, and I wanted to be accepted by the other musicians who I connected with, you know. And they would often say, "Oh, you sound just like a man," and I would always take that as a big compliment.
Interesting.
You know,
Yeah.
this was many years ago,
Years ago,
like over 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Things have changed a lot now.
Talk to me about Paul as a person and as a partner on stage and you know, in the studio.
Well, these kinds of things are always hard to talk about your friends, you know. I mean, Paul was, he had a very childlike quality about him, you know, in a good way, I thought. And he always said whatever he was thinking, you know. Yeah, you never had to wonder about anything. He was very open to the music. He didn't like to rehearse. He always said, "I'll just listen, I'll hear it."
Yeah.
And that's what he did.
Yeah.
It was great to play with him. I loved his compositions. I still play them in my own concerts now, in concerts with other people.
And him and Gary, I mean, the pair was just, I mean, it's so specific, their energy, and yet when we listen to the trio, the recordings with you, there's something so organic between you and Gary that doesn't take anything from the connection that Gary and Paul have. But I mean, the three of you is really like, I cannot find any other word than organic. There's something so natural in speaking in one voice. And I think that especially on Nothing Ever Was Anyway, the first recording of the three of you together, the compositions of Annette Peacock before Amaryllis, there's something where it's almost that we're forgetting what instrument it's we're hearing. Would you agree with that? Was it a feeling that was also shared when playing together?
Yeah.
Like, who am I? Where I am at with? It doesn't really matter anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And, you know, Gary was such an amazing bass player. I could always tell immediately his sound, you know, was so grounded.
Yeah.
Yeah, I miss him a lot. We were also good friends because he lived up around here.
Yeah.
And he would come over and have tea and we would talk. Lots of times he would sit right in that chair where you're sitting right now. And he was just such a great human being.
Yeah, a good friend.
Yeah. And being with him and Paul together was a lot of fun. They would do silly things, you know. Just, I don't know, I can't remember exactly.
Just jokes.
But they would just joke around and...
That's so nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you record in 97, you recorded Nothing Ever Was Anyway. And then a couple years later, you recorded Amaryllis. And it's almost even balanced between composition of yours, Gary and Paul. Mm-hmm. First of all, is this title because of the flower?
It was because of the flower and something that happened.
I had to Google that word because I didn't know.
Oh, really? Yeah, it's a flower
means.
that blooms
beautiful.
in the winter.
Yeah.
And something had happened, a kind of emotional experience in my life, something a little bit sad involving an amaryllis. So that's how I came up with this title, you know. But we also played free things.
Yeah.
And
was it Manfred's desire or that was...
Yes. Manfred came into the studio and he said, why don't you improvise some free ballads. And that was like a revelation to me, because up until that point, I had always thought of free playing as a certain style of playing. And then suddenly, when he said that, it was like, oh yeah, free is free. It's not free in a certain style, it's free. And then suddenly Gary started playing this line, which was like, ba-da-dum, bum, bum, dum, ba-da-dum, over and over and over. And then this melody just came, that I just started playing with him. It sounds like a written composition.
It really sounds like it's written.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And there was just the right moment and
Mm-hmm.
the right space.
Yeah.
That's also part of the magic with ECM recordings and Manfred Eicher's touch, which is just giving one direction once in a while, and that will be one magic word that just unlocks some directions, some colors. And this album is really magical for that. Do you remember the recording session?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I remember Manfred coming into the studio, and
That was in the Bunker studio in New York, right?
I
think it is.
I don't know. If you say so, it was.
That's
yeah.
fine.
But I remember very well, and I can kind of look over and see Gary starting to play that line. And also, I remember Manfred and Paul waltzing around the studio in that session, just kind of joking around, Yeah, I mean, working with Manfred is incredible. And yeah, if he likes something, he's so enthusiastic. And if he doesn't like something, just like Paul, he'll just say it, Like, I remember we started playing something once, and he stopped us and he said, "Oh, it sounds like my grandmother sitting by the window in her rocking chair or something, listening to this." I said, "Okay, we're not going to play that one."
Noted.
So, yeah.
You've been on ECM for a couple of years now.
A couple of decades.
Yeah. And you have a special relationship with this label.
Yeah. I am always so happy when a recording session is booked and I know I'm going to go over there and we're going to work together,
Yeah. And you've been working with Joe Lovano for a while now, especially on the Trio Tapestry project. It's been, 6 years at least?
Since around 2018, 2019.
Yeah. Okay. And 3 albums, serious touring.
Yeah.
I feel with this project that there's also something... I mean, with Joe and Carmen, the trio experience is obviously extremely different, but there is something that brings a new energy to an ECM recording. I feel it's extremely young. It's extremely... There's an excited youth in this trio, I feel. Both live and in CD, I just feel... does that sound right?
It's nice. It's a nice it's a nice thing to hear. I think there's an amazing energy and communication in the trio. And we've played some gigs where what you described before, feeling just like one person, or it's not even just people playing music. It's just this... It's beyond that. It's even beyond the music. We played a concert in Oslo. It was either last year or earlier this year. Where I was so high. We were all so high when we got off the stage. And when that happens, it's just like, yep, this is
magic.
That's why we play.
Exactly. That's why you do that. Thank you so much, Marilyn.
Thank you.
Marilyn Crispell about the vinyl release of her trio album Amaryllis. Thank you for joining, choosing, and listening to our ECM podcast. I'm Caroline Fontagneux, and I look forward to sharing more music with you in the next episode.